School is a business and has to be run as a business. It is a very particular type of business which is focused on the children and what's best for them. Ultimately, supporting the teachers to do what's best for the children is what my job is all about.
Vanessa Lakatos is a former entrepreneur who spent 18 years building a successful retail business before transitioning into education as a school bursar. She's managed everything from finances to property, steered schools through major challenges, and now serves on the board of ISBA, shaping the future of independent schools.
There's some schools now that the head is a chief executive. How do you feel about that?
I think in an individual school, the head needs to know about education, what the teachers are doing, because...
What would you advise a new bursar coming in?
I would definitely recommend it. I love it. It's a great job.
Their mindset of traditional education goes into how you run it and how you manage it and what you do. And that's interesting because I think that's where the change has to take place.
I think without the quality of education, none of us are successful.
Morning, Vanessa. Thanks very much for coming on this morning. What would be really helpful is that if we could start by discussing your previous career before you became a bursar and understanding a little bit about how you ended up as a bursar and some of the lessons you've learned since you became a bursar.
My main background is that I ran my own business for 18 years. When I was 24, I opened a shop, men's and women's clothing, and I built that up over the 18 years into a fairly solid business with shops in Henley-on-Thames, Hungerford and Salcombe in Devon. Obviously, running your own business, you're in charge of everything, everything from the finances and the forecasting to the HR, the recruitment, the managing staff, buying, sales, marketing, health and safety, property management, all of those different areas, which is actually more or less what I have to do as a bursar as well. And things like understanding risk and taking that into account and with the decisions that I'm making. You can't run a business without an element of risk, as I'm sure you know, and weigh everything up and decide whether it's worth going ahead with or not, and whether you're prepared to accept that risk. And that's kind of the same as a bursar, isn't it? It's a similar sort of thing.
So how do you find being an entrepreneur?
I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I mean, every day is different. There's challenges. It was unbelievably hard work because it literally never stops. You never leave work. 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. It never stops. But it's incredibly rewarding, and you have good days and bad days, like in any job. I did enjoy it, but ultimately, because my business was retail, I decided around about 2014 that there wasn't a future in the high street. I was selling other brands, and I didn't have my own brand. So therefore, I made the decision to close the business, which in hindsight was absolutely the right thing to do. I'm absolutely thrilled. I did not have high street shops during COVID, and I'm very thrilled I don't have one now.
Yes, it's not a good time to be in retail, is it? So it's probably the right decision for you.
Yes, it definitely was. But it was really good fun. I loved it. It was, as I said, risky at times.
And how did you find that role? I mean, okay, so you left there, and then you moved on. What made you decide where you moved to?
Well, having been self-employed for 18 years, I was trying to figure out whether I was actually employable by someone else. And so I was chatting to various people who came in the shop looking for my next opportunity. And one of those happened to be a local guy with a marketing company. And so I went down to his office, had a really good chat with him. And he basically ended up, he was sort of saying, I actually haven't got anything at the moment, but I know there's someone down the hall who's looking for someone. And so he took me down the hall and he introduced me to you, Nigel. And so you actually took a risk to decide on whether I was employable and employed me in the cost reduction company. So I spent a couple of years working for you in your office, sort of managing the office, helping you to manage some of the salespeople who were working remotely, and consultants, working with bursars, working with schools, looking at reducing their costs, reducing waste, getting them to use less stuff. I learned a lot of stuff from you about all, how to save on the energy, on the procurement, or the photocopying, all those sort of different areas. I spoke to a lot of bursars. I went to various conferences with you as an exhibitor. So I saw the independent school business from that side, and then I thought, actually, do you know what? I could do what they're doing. So yeah, and as far as you're concerned, I went over to the dark side. And now I'm on the other
Poacher turned gamekeeper.
running like that.
Brilliant. And so, how was the time spent at at the cost reduction company? How did you feel that helped you in terms of doing your bursar's job?
Well, it's reassured me that I was employable, you were a very good boss, and I was quite happy to do as you asked me to do. I learnt a huge amount about independent schools, about the challenges facing them, about saving money without cutting quality, basically, looking for ways to do things better and more efficiently. And yeah, it was. I've spent a couple of years working for you, and it was good.
Excellent. Well, and then you then moved on to what was quite a small school initially, wasn't it?
Yes, I then became bursar of Padworth College, which is a full boarding international senior school. Kids from all over the world, 40 different countries, and that was a learning curve as well. The first week I was there, there was a child basically that had come over from Vietnam as part of a people trafficking ring, and she vanished. And I think it was a nationwide ring, and there were kids vanished from a lot of different schools that day. They took them all the same day. They all disappeared. Yeah, caused, that was an interesting time.
So did that involve government agencies then?
Yes. Yeah, it was a big police operation, lots of stuff with UKVI and basically tightening up the rules to make sure that these people who were really who they said they were, because I think there was some concern that they weren't school age, they weren't who they said they were, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the girl that went from Padworth was never found.
Really? So she literally came over, stayed for a few weeks, and then just disappeared?
No, she'd done the whole of the previous term, and then
Wow.
a week of the spring term, and then one weekend they went out shopping, and she got into a car and off she went.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's quite a start.
I know, and I didn't sort of realise at the time quite what was going on. They were like, "We've lost a child." I was like, "Oh gosh, that's careless." And then,
was it during term time she was lost? I suppose she was there full time, was she?
well, she came back after Christmas,
Right.
and yeah, a week or so into term, off she went.
But
yeah, we weren't the only school that lost children that day, I think. Oh, children. I say children. I'm not sure whether they were children.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, it's difficult to work out the ages at that stage. So that was a bit of a different experience. And so, how did you find it working for? Because that was a proprietorial school or a business, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't at the time. No,
okay.
it was a charity. So I had governors to report to.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And it was actually sold whilst I was there. I managed the process of all the due diligence and the sale, and I did all that on behalf of the governors while I was there. And then I left.
And that was the point at which you left?
Yeah.
Because the different relationships how did you find the different relationships between working for trustees and working for an individual? I assume he's an entrepreneur because he bought schools, didn't he?
Yes, two guys. They bought it jointly. I found that a bit more difficult. The oversight and because it was their business. It's slightly different from working alongside a head to working alongside a proprietor, who is our business person.
And
Yeah,
how do you think
it kind of didn't need me.
Oh, I see. So they were taking on the role of the financial role, which is one of the roles that you obviously had.
Yeah.
And do you feel that that's quite a different? I mean, obviously a different relationship, but how does it vary?
I think I mean, I don't know how other people's experiences, but for me, I really enjoy the running of the business. I like the strategic stuff. I like all the the planning ahead. I do enjoy the day-to-day grind of being a bursar, but a really interesting part of it is where the business is going, how it's being run, and those strategic decisions for the future. And so obviously I was no part of that with them, so it just wasn't for me.
Oh, okay. So you were really just a sort of, I suppose, working in the accounts department almost, rather than actually strategically part of the SLT and.
Sort of. I mean, I left soon after they took over. So
Okay. So you moved on to Gayhurst,
yes, where I am now.
and how have you found that?
I've loved it here. I've been here 6 years. 6 years next week, actually. And there's a great team here. Obviously, it's a prep school with about 350 children, so it's a sort of mid-sized prep school, fairly reasonable. But being a prep school, we still have a fairly small team, which means that I'm involved in a lot of things. I still find myself out in the car park in my high vis directing traffic. I'm wandering around with the builders this morning, unlocking buildings, all that kind of stuff. Still doing all of that. But I'd still also, working with the governors on the strategy and the head, obviously, and making plans for the future.
So how do you work that relationship? Because it's a three-way relationship, and how do you manage the academic with the financial?
I think it's a challenge for all bursars, and it depends on the head. Obviously, it's the head bursar relationships is always an interesting one, and there's got to be challenge. You've got to be, fighting it out, not fighting exactly, but talking things through and challenging and coming to the best long-term strategy for the school. So it's not my job to say to the head, yes, you can have whatever you want. I don't think that's my job. My job is to say, well, if you want that, this is what's going to have to go. Okay, you want, I don't know, a school nurse, which TA is going to go? Those kind of conversations have to be the voice of reality, really.
And do you feel that you get listened to? I mean, does that take time to? I mean, that's a relationship that's quite difficult to build, isn't it? Because you have to be a bit confrontational.
Yes. I'm not afraid of a bit of confrontation. I'm not awfully keen on it. I will avoid it if I can, but I will fight my corner if I need to. And also, with the governors as well, it's like you say, it's a bit of a three-sided thing, because the longer term strategy is really the governors as much as the head. Something that we'll work out together.
I'm interested in that bit, the governor bit, because it seems to me that is becoming a much more important role than it was historically.
I agree. The days of the governors turning up for a meeting, having a few glasses of wine and a jolly and going home again are well and truly gone. We're lucky at Gayhurst. We've got a really good governing board with a lot of very smart, skilled people on it. They're mostly pretty engaged. They're interested in what's going on here. They're asking questions and, taking the time to find stuff out. And it is really important. It is something that they need to take seriously and allocate time to, not just meetings, but as well.
So who recruits them?
I don't know how it's managed in other schools. Recently here, we tend to have quite a few ex-parent governors. So, in other words, when the children leave in year 6, we sort of have a fairly good idea of parents and what their backgrounds are. And sort of 3 or 4 years later, if you're looking for someone with a particular skill, you go back to that year 6. And once their children have been gone 3 or 4 years, they have a much more open-minded view of the school. But they also have a really big emotional investment in the school being successful. So that's worked quite well for us.
I mean, it's interesting because there seem to be quite a lot of sort of ex-pupils in a lot of governing bodies.
We do have one ex-pupil on our governing board as well. I guess he's in his 30s.
Oh, right. Okay. So it's quite young.
Yeah, but he's an auditor. So he's got some really good skills. He's a great addition to our board and brings a new perspective, because you need boards to be diverse, not just gender diverse or that background, but age group as well, and viewpoint. The last thing you want is a board that's an echo chamber. You want a bit of conflict in the board as well. You want people to have different points of view and to be putting those across.
It's interesting because certainly the feedback I've had from quite a lot of schools is that often that isn't the case. And that's one of the issues, is that you end up with, because it is, as you say, it's a three-legged stool, really. And if one of them isn't working properly, then obviously it falls over. So that seems to be one of the key areas for the longer term of schools, is strengthening the governing bodies to make sure that they are strong enough to be able to deliver the strategy.
Yes, because they do have a lot of responsibility. They're not just a figurehead. They have legal responsibilities for the school, and it's important that they need to understand that when they join. And maybe the days are ahead where certain members of the governing board are paid by the school, whether it's the chair of governors or the chairs of the committees. I don't know, but it is something to consider. If we're expecting these people to put in a lot of time and take on a lot of responsibility, maybe that's the way forward. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think you're right. I think it also allows you to make slightly stronger demands on them. Because it's very difficult if someone's just giving their time for free. It's sometimes more difficult to be able to say, well, we expect to start expectations and change the expectations. Okay, so how do you feel? Because you're unusual in the situation, because coming in from an entrepreneurial background is pretty unusual in the bursar's job. And I mean, a lot of them historically have come through the army and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And
they're still coming.
But actually, interestingly, a lot of the army ones now are actually women coming in.
Yeah.
From the army, which is a slightly different change, which is good to see. But how do you feel that's helped you?
I think it's helped me a lot. The other sort of other third of bursars tend to come in from very financial backgrounds as well. And obviously, I'm not an accountant, but having run my own business and understood it from literally the bookkeeping upwards, I have a really good handle on the finances and the accounts. I also find that I have an awareness of the risk that I mentioned earlier, and how return on investment, whether that's investment of money or time or resources, weighing that kind of thing up, because I've been doing that for 18 years, but I've been doing it when the stakes are much higher, when my house is on the line, and that kind of risk. It was absolutely feasible that I could have lost my house while I was running my business. So it's the perspective now is that it's nowhere near as stressful being a bursar as it was being self-employed. I know some people find it very stressful and all that, but for me,
Yeah.
there's a lot to do. There's a lot of responsibility, but I'm going to get paid each month, and I'm not going to lose my house. Possibly I go to prison, if I really mess up on the health and safety, but
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
No.
Wouldn't be ideal. But I mean, isn't it interesting because it's this element of resilience that and I think that the resilience required to be a bursar is actually quite high. I think you've mentioned, I know, into the past of it being quite lonely.
Yes, it is. You are very much a lone voice. I'm sitting around the table in the senior leadership team. There's 7 of us. There's me and the head of marketing and admissions, and then there's 5 teachers. So, their entire perspective is on the children, which is absolutely fine. And my perspective is on the business. But it is only my voice saying, yes, but this is what's going to happen. So it can be lonely. It means that the other bursars are absolutely essential to have that kind of support network. I'm going out for lunch with the local South Bucks bursars next week, and we'll all just have a proper moan about everything, which is great.
It's interesting that, isn't it? Because I think, that sort of comes to one of the questions I have further down the line, which is the future of schools. And I mean, you've done a couple of things about possibly one of them could be we have to pay governors. I wonder whether another is a sort of a more balanced team on the SLT.
Yes, I think in some schools you've got like development managers on there as well as the marketing and admissions people, so it maybe balances out. We do have a development manager at Gayhurst, but she sits sort of just below SLT level at the moment because she's only been in post a little while and it's still building. But the thing is, whilst a school is a business and has to be run as a business, it is a very particular type of business which is focused on the children and what's best for them. Ultimately, supporting the teachers to do what's best for the children is what my job is all about, really. Whether it's this generation of children or future generations. And that I have to do my best to facilitate the direction of travel for the children.
Yeah, I sort of get that. But then there needs to be an awareness when people are making demands on you of that. And that seems to me what is lacking in most schools.
I think there's a lot to be said for some training. I was given the opportunity here to run an inset with all the staff, basically explaining what I do. So I had the stage for an hour, and I was talking through my job and what I do, and about the school's finances and how they look at and how the numbers stack up, and that helped everybody, not just the SLT, but every single person, to have a bit more of an appreciation for, when they ask me for something and I say no, there's a reason behind it.
Well, it's very interesting that, because I think what you just said there has been part of the problem in the schools in the past, is that there isn't anyone saying no. Everyone said yes, actually, and I think that world is changing, and the feeling I get is that the academic side of a school have never been given any responsibility for the cost of things. And your point is valid, which is the training for that. And I've always had conversations when people have said, wretched teachers, all they do is spend money. They're not interested in saving any money. And my view was, but that's your fault, because you've never made them responsible for it. And maybe that's something that needs to come in the future a bit more. They get a budget, but they're not really responsible for it, are they? They just spend it.
And they don't understand how it fits into the bigger picture. And they don't understand, how their photocopying fits in, and how their leaving the lights on and the radiators on and the windows open and all of that kind of stuff feeds into how the whole thing works. Once they start to understand, if you actually tell them how their actions do make a difference, and you can say, well, if you can bring the energy costs down, then you can have more money in your budget. That kind of direct, or you can have an extra TA if you can save this much on the energy. So everyone needs to understand their contribution in every way.
Well, it's interesting because certain schools seem to have moved that route with the head. I mean, there are some schools now that the head is a chief executive. How do you feel about that?
What, without a teaching background?
Well, no, I think some of them have got teaching backgrounds, haven't they? But they're called chief executives. I don't know. Both. Either. I mean, there could be either, actually. I mean, what's your view on both?
I think in an individual school, the head needs to know about education, properly know about it. Whether they're a qualified teacher, I don't know that that's essential, but they need to really thoroughly understand education and what the teachers are doing, because certainly in my school, the teachers are amazing. They, all the work they put in, all the expertise they have is brilliant. They're great. All the stuff they do, the magic they work. And clearly I don't really understand what they do. And I think whoever is the head really does need to understand that, and whatever form that takes. If you're the CEO of a school's group, then probably you're running a business that just happens to have schools. So it's maybe not so much the same. But it's still, I think, without the quality of education, none of us are successful. That is. But
I suppose, but if you think about it from the point of view of a business, say, a CEO wouldn't necessarily be responsible for the research and development in a company, or wouldn't be responsible for the branding or the product, would they? So you'd have someone in that organization who was responsible, and the CEO was overall responsible. Now, it's interesting because, I think it's quite controversial in terms of where teaching has been for so many years. Sometimes these things are more about the person that's doing it than necessarily the concept. I think there are a couple of schools that have made the head the CEO.
Okay. Well, there are loads of schools where the bursars, there's
CEOs as well.
COO
or COOs. Yeah. But they're still the same thing.
Well, sometimes it's just the title, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think, I get your point in that a lot of CEOs, it doesn't matter if you're running Tesco's or, I don't know, BMW. The product is not so much important. But I think a school is a specific type of business. Customers are very emotionally invested in the business of educating their children, and they have a very clear requirement of the outcome, and failure is not an option. So I think there are.
So if you started tomorrow, so you've just been given a school, okay, and you have to structure it the way that you would structure it. How would you do that differently, say, or maybe you wouldn't do it differently, maybe do the same, but how would you do it, in a different way?
Oof, I'm not really sure on that one. I think you're landing me in the deep end there.
No, I'm not. I think the same way as you're saying, you have to challenge your governors should be challenging. All I'm saying is that I think the norm in the industry should be challenged going forward, because of some of the rocky and wavy seas they're going into. And unless one challenge it, because the conclusion may be it's actually fine the way we're doing it. But unless one goes down that route and questions how things should be done differently, it will never change. Because the problem is, the way I see it, is bursars move from one school to another, heads move from one school to another. So they all, and actually 90% of the schools all run the same way.
Yeah.
They're different people, there are different nuances on it. But overall, the structure of how they run, and an example is everything is, very little is outsourced. Everything is in-house. So I'm just thinking, how could one, think a bit of blue sky thinking about potentially how they could be run in the future? I mean, one of the things you touched on briefly was the groups thing.
Yeah, and of course they're being very successful. They are increasing. They're snapping up quite a lot of schools. Mergers and acquisitions are busy from what I hear, and a lot of people think that is the future, and that we will all be part of a group in however many years' time. I think there's a difference between the big, well-known senior schools who kind of can stand on their own, and then the rest of us, whether we're prep schools or senior schools, but schools with less than 500 pupils of whatever age group. There's some thinking to be done, whether you're sharing resources locally, which that's something that I talk about sometimes with the local bursars, or whether you are you have an affiliation, or whether you're actually owned by a group. I don't know whether that will be the case. It's a slightly different model, the schools groups. They do run things extremely efficiently. They are very efficient.
In what way do you mean when you say efficiently?
Well, because when it's privately owned, they want to make a profit, and so they are they're even more than a charitable school. They are looking at every single penny that's being spent, and that's across the board. Whereas
when you say across the board, you mean
every employee, probably.
Okay, including all the teachers, everything.
I would think so, yeah. Whereas I think in a charitable school, where we're trying to make a surplus for reinvesting, for investing in bursaries, for investing in links with the community, it is a very different viewpoint. If the school has a good year, I'm not going to do anything different. I don't get paid anymore. I don't get a bonus. No. So,
well, maybe you should.
Maybe. So I know there is that model in some schools where the head and the bursar get a bonus.
Do they? Do you know? I haven't heard of that.
I don't know whether that is just in groups or whether that is in charitable schools. I don't know how that works, because I've not been in that. But it's very
interesting. It's interesting you should say that, though, because do you think there is anything detrimental in those schools by them doing it that way to the teaching and the kids, the outcomes of the school?
I don't know. I don't know enough about it, and I don't know any specific schools. I just know by sort of hearsay that it does happen.
I mean, I have had experience of that once, where there's a school actually not a million miles away from you. I went to a proprietorial school that was about 400, and then I went to a charity school, trustees school, that was about 400, literally within days. And there was a substantial difference in the employee numbers.
Yeah. The ratios. Yeah.
But actually, when you looked at the schools, the numbers were both the same. The outcomes were pretty much the same in terms of, as I understood it. I don't think the parents were any upset with one or more than the other. And the interesting thing was that they did quite a lot of outsourcing because they didn't have the numbers in house.
Oh, the proprietorial one.
Yeah, because what he did was he did all his planning so that his a lot of the maintenance stuff was flooded during the holidays and stuff like that. It was just a different way of planning it. But what's your view on that, on outsourcing?
I think there's definitely a place for it. I mean, I would love to obviously always keep the payroll as tight as I possibly can, because it's increasingly expensive. As of last week, more expensive to have employees. So I do think that is a good thing. I think a lot of schools have traditionally been overstaffed. They have these oddities like a art technician or these little jobs that do you really need that? And I think the way the economy is now, all schools have been forced to look at all of those jobs, look at all of the timetables. What kind of percentage timetable are the teachers working to? Are they on 60%, in which case you're not getting value for money out of them? Are they on 80%, in which case you're probably at about max? Are you using expensive teachers to monitor lunchtimes? Could that be done by someone cheaper and you can get better use out of your teachers? It's about deployment of resources, isn't it? Making sure you're doing things as efficiently as you can.
And from the point of view of, because that was interesting, because when I was talking about outsourcing, I was talking more about the sort of grounds and the cleaning and things like that. And interestingly, you were talking about the academic side. And actually, that is quite an interesting, particularly the sharing issue is quite interesting. And I mean, you sometimes hear comments like, I wouldn't share with them because they're our competitors.
That's probably something you hear from heads. It's less something you'd hear from bursars, I think.
Okay.
And obviously there are regional differences and local differences. If you have got an arch rival that's 2 miles down the road, then you're just probably not. But I mean, in this area, all the schools have their own USP and their own identity, I would say. I mean, I'm saying that from a position of being one of the strongest schools in the area, I think. So maybe that makes me more secure than some of the others and more open to this kind of thing. I don't know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there is and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this, but I think this sort of almost the name independent school is almost obsessive at times. You can talk to some of the big schools and they'd almost like they'd like to put a moat around the school and produce all their own electricity and not be reliant on anyone else. It's almost that type of mentality sometimes you hear, because they want to be, I wouldn't dare share a mower with someone else because I might need it myself, and it's sort of almost that change of mindset that needs to happen, that says, actually we can do this, because I've always felt that they'll still be your rival, but maybe the two of you have got £50,000 more in your bank account. But you're still a rival, but that's fine. But, that's where I suppose that the thinking is an interesting, and also the fact that your people are costing you so much money.
Yeah, quite. I mean, we fight for our name of independent schools. The government are very keen to label us private schools.
Yeah. No, I get that.
We are still independent schools.
Yeah. Which is right. And I don't think it's the name. I don't think is an issue. I think sometimes that what one's got to be careful of is that the thinking isn't like that. It is more open. And it's interesting you're saying actually bursars are more open than heads.
I think so because bursars tend to share ideas a lot. If you're looking for something, you just put an email out there and you'll get half a dozen bursars will reply and say, well, this is what I do. We're always happy to do that. Obviously, I'm not a head. I don't know whether that happens with heads. Maybe it does. But it definitely does happen with bursars. And we do, communicate, even get together just for a coffee and a whinge.
Well, it's quite interesting because the focus is so strongly on education, which clearly it has to be because it's a school. But it's quite interesting. I mean, you've only got to look at like podcasts, for example. If you go on and put educational podcasts, probably 99% of them are all about heads and leadership and children and kids and all of that stuff. And there's probably 2 are about the people that actually run the schools. And make them work on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, and I do think one of your questions about the future, I think bursars need to be more visible and more, out and talking about what is involved. Because the days of the bursar being in an office up in the attic and no one ever sees him, no. And really he's not fit to be seen anyway. I think those days are gone, thankfully. I think they're probably getting close to 50% female bursars, I would say. I don't know, but just looking around the room at these things, I think that's often the case. There's quite a bit to do on diversity, certainly, but the gender equality, I think, is more or less there. And I think there are some very, very clever, very charismatic, very interesting bursars out there who should be much more visible. The parents should know who the bursar is. In the old days, you only know who the bursar is if you haven't paid your fees.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be the case, really.
Well, or if you can't pay your fees, yeah. So
You know who to hide from.
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think, and so that brings me on to your role, your new role on the board of the ISBA.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you found that, and how do you enjoy that and see that as part of your future?
It's really interesting. I've been doing it a couple of years now. It's coming up 2 years, and I find ISBA. I've always found it to be essential to doing my job. The resources and the advice that they provide is amazing. The value for money is way better than any of the other associations out there, in my view. And yeah, I'm really very proud to be on the board. And just like with the schools that they represent, it's an interesting time for ISBA itself, because it's got to move with the times as well, and make sure that it continues to be relevant and important and is still providing what bursars need, whether they're called bursars or whether they're called something else. It's an interesting time all round.
So how would you like that to go? How do you think that might go?
What go?
Being on the board, and how you might be able to influence the change for the future, and what, because it was interesting what you were saying about this business of being more visible. I mean, how could you think they can do that?
Well, I think ISBA certainly have been very visible with the whole discussion about BAT. They've been in the press. They've been quoted a lot and interviewed a lot, and the profile is higher. You know, the ISC and ISBA are really the two associations that have been quoted. Obviously, ISC the most, but then followed by ISBA. In the press, they've been much more high profile than they ever have been before. And obviously, just as with the school, my role on the board is to just have the oversight and to make sure that it continues to run in the best way that it can be run. You know, there's an executive team in place at ISBA who are doing the running, and I would not interfere with the day-to-day running and the operational side of it. But you know, as with anyone on the board, you've got the oversight and the looking ahead.
So after the number of years you've done, what would you advise a new bursar coming in, and someone who's thinking about being a bursar?
I would definitely recommend it. I love it. It's a great job. There is literally never a dull moment. You do not know from hour to hour what you're going to be up to your elbows in. So I would definitely say do it. I would also say don't get too tied to your desk. You are, if you're out for a couple of hours at a ISBA meeting or something, the school is not going to fall down. You are not that essential. So yeah, well,
Okay.
Sometimes it feels like you're carrying the whole thing on your shoulders. You're not. It'll be fine.
It won't
Because I
fall
know
down.
particularly in smaller schools, bursars feel they can't go to the conference. They can't even go to a regional meeting because they feel they can't get out of the office. And I think that's a massive shame for them and for their school. I think we all need that support and to understand there's others who are facing the exact same thing. I always come back from those meetings going, okay, it's not just me.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, and it comes back to this sort of, that it's quite a lonely role. And maybe people need to understand that before they take it on. I mean, I think an FD's role in a lot of companies is also quite lonely, to a certain extent, isn't it? Because no one wants that, role necessarily. So it is it's not an unusual situation necessarily, but I think it's, okay. So what sort of things would you think I should do before I decided to take that
Talk to
leap?
people. Talk to, have a chat with the other bursars.
The thing is, you never know where they are, do you? I mean, it's the point that you make. If someone said to me, "Go and find I mean, clearly we've been doing it for years, but
Yeah.
I think historically, if someone had said to me, "Go and find," I'd think, "Well, where do I find one of them?"
Well, you would call the school office and say, "Can I please have a chat with the bursar? I'm thinking of going into that role in the future, and I'd just really like to have a chat about whether I should." And I've actually had a couple of those sort of conversations with people who have contacted me. I don't know whether I took them out of it or not. I don't know what's happened. But I think most people would always be happy to have that chat and just to understand what it's really like.
Yeah, get a feel for. And what
Yeah.
sort of experience do you think they should have, or would be helpful?
Multitasking. And all that kind of prioritizing. But you don't have to be an accountant, but you do need a solid understanding of the finances of the school. And you need some strategic thinking. Now, I would say those across all sizes of school. If you're in a larger school, you probably don't need the specific knowledge so much as you need in a school this size. So, I know what I'm talking about with Janella, with Section 19 permits on the minibuses. I know what they're doing on the fire testing and all of that kind of stuff. I know what radon gas percentage area we are. If you're in a big school, you probably don't need to know that because other people will know it. But if you're going into a small school, you learn that stuff pretty quick.
Interesting, isn't it? And I mean, if someone has said these are the things you're going to need to know about, they've probably run a mile. So I don't know anything about any of that. And no one teaches you that. I mean, did you do a training role? Did you go and do a training course with ISBA?
Not before I jumped into the job. No, I did. I went on an IOSH managing safely health and safety course soon after I got the role, and that was 3 or 4 day course, and that was really worth doing because whilst I'd been sort of in charge of the health and safety in a boarding school, it's a whole different level, and you really need to know what you're responsible for because the bursar is responsible for it. So
yes, I mean that's the hard thing. You come into a job. I mean, particularly someone's coming from Deloitte or they come in from somewhere else. That it's not just the numbers. There's an awful lot of other stuff that's probably more important actually in the short term.
Well, I mean that's the stuff you can go to prison on.
Yeah.
I mean, assuming you're not, committing fraud or anything like that, which I think we can assume is the case.
Yeah, hopefully.
Your biggest risk is the health and safety stuff. And making sure that everyone within the business is being looked after. And
does that, it's interesting, is that for everyone in the school? So for example, would all the SLT be on the hook for that?
No, I'm the responsible person.
Okay, so the head's not on the hook for it?
They're ultimately responsible, but they delegate responsibility for those things to me.
Okay.
So, they sort of should be checking that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but they don't really know. That's
okay.
They in ISI inspections recently, they've stopped. Well, for a long time they didn't have any bursars as ISI inspectors, so you'd get like a random deputy head inspecting the school on health and safety, which is a joke. They haven't got a clue.
No.
They've got a tick box, a list of things going, have you got this? Yes, show me. there it is. And they don't know what they're looking at. So yeah, if you're inspected by a bursar, you know you're going to get a much more thorough grilling on the health and safety than you would get from someone else.
Interesting. So are there any other things that you'd like to tell, a bursar or someone who's likely to be one, lessons learned, etc.? We covered quite a lot of things, I think, but I'm interested if there's anything else any more tips that you might have for someone coming into the role, apart from being resilient.
Yeah, definitely plenty of that. Yeah, because even it's holiday time at the moment, so there are 4 of us, I think, on site today. And they'll all come back to school after Easter, and they'll say, "Did you have a nice break?" I'll be like, "I haven't had a break. Actually, I have been here running the school." It's that kind of. Ugh. And the speeches at the end of term, it's like, everybody going to have a break. You've worked really hard. You deserve a break. It's I'm like, all right, me and my team don't deserve a break. Obviously, it's all that kind of.
You see, isn't it interesting that, because and in a way, the way things have this we talked about before, the sort of the stool, with the 3-legged stool thing. Who manages you? You know what I mean? And in a funny way, that it's almost like a bursar. There's no one to, and I don't mean that I mean that from a personal point of view. That your personal management, that's probably where the resilience comes in slightly. And when you talk about the loneliness comes in, because people don't necessarily, there's an expectation that the bursar sorts all that out, but not, whether necessarily the bursar's, is the bursar okay?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm really lucky here. My governing board check in with me. I've had an email from one of them this morning, just to sort of say, "Thanks, you're doing a great job. Hope everything's okay." So I get that kind of support from my board, head as well, and from my point of view, the director of admissions and marketing, she also works during the holidays, so we kind of got each other's back a little bit on that. But heads do work in the holidays. They're not here 9 to 5, like we tend to be, or 8 till 6, or whatever. But they are available and answering emails and checking in, and is there anything you need? So if you're working in a good school, that support should be there for you personally, for your CPD, or for just.
So where's the official line though? Who does your appraisal?
The head.
The head does your appraisal.
Yeah.
But actually, the people you work with most, as well as the governors, do they get involved in that? Because that's quite a key element for you.
Yeah. They haven't got involved in that.
That's interesting.
But yeah, I mean, that might be a thing of the future. I think we haven't done it here yet, but I know in other places there's a sort of 360 appraisal where all your direct reports are asked about you as well, to feed into your appraisal, and I think that's a good thing, because
scary.
Well, yeah, but
the good thing.
The whole point of an appraisal is for you to improve.
That's true.
Therefore, their opinion's really important, and I value their opinions.
Yes, and I think that's a really good way to do it. I have to say, it's just a case of, but it is, you've got to be quite open-minded.
Yeah, but
well, the people who are good at what they do don't worry about it. It's the people who maybe aren't quite so good at what they do would worry about it more. But that's a good thing. Yes, no, that's true. That's true. Brilliant.
And we're always keen to do better. And also, we've all got to understand none of us are irreplaceable.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yes, it is interesting. I think actually your point that you made right at the beginning about people understanding what the role is and what happens. Maybe one should do a day in the life of a bursar. that would not probably be a bad thing to do for people to understand a bit more about how it works and this idea, the multitasking bit.
Although there is no typical day. There's just
No, but it's more the interruptions, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's and I think it's quite interesting because I've seen obviously lots of bursars come and go in situations, and the ones that go fastest tend to be the ones that have been in corporates, been in situations where they've been in control of their time, and then suddenly they're in a role where they have absolutely no control over their time, and they're fighting all the time to try and control it. And I suppose that seems to be the difference between the ones that are comfortable in that environment, particularly the ones who come from corporates and go to smaller schools.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think so. And actually, that's another thing that my retail background helps me with, because, I was always running a business from a shop floor. So, customer comes in, you stop what you're doing, and
Get on with it.
that kind of thing. It's that constant interruptions and responding to what's put in front of you.
Yeah, it's fascinating now, because that's quite a difficult thing to do. A lot of people find that very, very stressful.
Yeah.
And they're the ones often that come in and go quite quickly. And also the understanding of the school bit. I think that's, if you come from a corporate world and you're used to a corporate world and then you come into a school world, that's quite hard, because they sort of think they can turn everything around very fast. And that doesn't happen.
You get a lot of, but we've always done it this way. Nothing that winds me up more.
Do you know what though, Vanessa? I think that is the most important thing, actually, for the future of schools, is they have to get rid of that. And I've always, we talked about this before, but I always feel that there's this sort of, that what happens is that traditional education falls into areas that are completely irrelevant to traditional education. So their mindset of traditional education goes into how you run it and how you manage it and what you do and the way it works. And that's interesting, because I think that's where the change has to take place, where everyone has to start questioning how they're doing it.
Well, just the education itself, the whole teacher at the front, kids sitting at the desks. That's been hundreds of years. So come on, there must be a better way of doing it. I've had conversations with our head of maths, and she says, well, the stuff we have to teach isn't relevant to the children today. We're teaching them about money, but they don't use coins. They've got no concept of buying something in a shop with coins. They teach them about bus timetables. They don't do that. They just look up on their phone when the next train is. They're not even looking at a clock. They look at the time on their phones. All of this stuff, they're trying to make the maths relevant to the children today, but it's got to move. They've got to understand about interest rates and mortgages and, I don't know, Bitcoin maybe, I don't know.
But you're right. Because at the end of the day, we were taught how to add up and multiply and divide. And you don't need to know any of that stuff anymore, because you can just go to your phone and do it all.
My first job was in a pub, and I had to add it up in my head. I've got $1.95 for a pint of this, and all of that. Now you just tap it on a screen, pint of beer, and they don't even know how much they cost, because it's nothing to do with them. And so,
and when the customer goes £6 for a pint of beer, they go, "Is that how much it is?"
Yeah. Well, usually they know, because they've been on the other side.
So that's interesting, isn't it? And I do think you're right. I think there's a lot of discussion about that going forward, about how, and that also, talks about the traditional, all the things that cause you headaches, like, the buildings and all of these things. Are they going to be different?
Well, quite. Sixth form education, is that going to be in a building, or is it going to be all online and remote? So that you're not having a teacher for a class of 3 doing some random A-level, but they're in a remote online classroom where there's a teacher teaching across 10 different schools.
But you see, I come back to the main thing for me. I think that the face-to-face is where you learn your resilience.
I agree. And I actually, certainly in primary schools, there's absolutely no substitute for that personal interaction. The COVID years really showed these children need to be in school.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
don't need
or
to be
at
out
least with a
anywhere.
group of mates or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the equivalent of the face-to-face interaction. And,
Yeah.
I do think when I look at it now, I mean, I think we were only talking about it this morning, and we were talking to some friends who've got kids who are, they're in their teenage years, and I sit and think, thank goodness ours have gone through that and they're out the other side. I mean, goodness me, some of the stuff. I mean, I think we had 5 of them. 4 of them had children that were being treated for ADHD.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't even know what it meant.
No, no, quite.
And that's a
Yeah.
challenge for you guys. And that's a challenge for you on the cost of things. And,
Yeah, exactly. The ratios of adults to children, I think everyone is finding it difficult because the kids need more time. And that's expensive.
well, Vanessa, thank you very much for your time. It's been great.